All right, welcome to Keep 100 Radio. For today's guest, I am going to do a little guess who. If you've listened to the podcast before, then you have actually had this guest. You've heard this guest before. This guest is a registered dietitian. She is type 1 diabetic herself and has been living with type 1 diabetes for 10 years. We pretty much have the same diagnosis story. Pretty much all the synchronicities that you can think about in life, they're pretty much there. And she is a great resource to our community, loves things like pizza and Starbucks, and one of those that we are going to talk about today. But if you guessed Amanda Ciprich, you are correct.
Hi, I'm back, and I'm super excited to be here.
Welcome back. Do you want to take a second to just kind of like introduce yourself, share a little bit more about you?
Yeah, so like Lizzie said, I'm Amanda. I'm the registered dietitian behind T1D Nutritionist. Been type 1 for 10 years now. And it's been a roller coaster ride nonetheless, but I'm super excited to have the conversation today about one of our beloved foods.
I feel like anybody who's listening to this podcast that's not type 1, they're gonna be like, why? Like, we're gonna talk about pizza today. Let's like talk about that. And anybody who's listening who's not type 1, they're like, why are you having a whole episode on pizza? But if you're type 1, like, you know that this whole food group and just the idea of these different meals can be so nuanced. So we dedicated a whole episode for it.
Yes. Pizza is like one of like the most infamous foods I find in like the diabetes community. It's like pizza, Chinese food, cereal, all of those things. They have quite the reputation.
Yep.
And I think it deserves a conversation to talk about all of the nuances and why those foods are so challenging.
Yeah. So let's kind of like start from the beginning. Like, you have a deep history with pizza.
Yes. So Lizzie knows this story, but for those of you who don't, I was diagnosed 10 years ago when I was 18. And I was in the emergency room for literally like 10 hours. No one wanted to feed me because my blood sugar was like 600, reading error on the glucometer. So I was absolutely starving. And by the time I was finally admitted into a room in the hospital, the cafeteria was closed, and all the nurse that she could offer me was like saltine crackers and like peanut butter and jelly packets. And I was like, ma'am, that's not gonna cover it. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. So she was like, someone from your family can go out and get some food. So at like 10 o'clock at night with like my mom, my dad, and my sister, one of the easiest things to get is pizza. So my sister comes back, gets a pizza, and we're all like sitting on the hospital bed trying to, make the best of like a pretty wild day. And I will never, ever forget the look on the nurse's face when she came into the hospital, came into the room, because she was coming in to check my vitals once again. And she like stopped in the door and just like looked at me, and then looked at the pizza, and then looked at me eating the pizza, and said, enjoy your last supper because tomorrow you start insulin. 6 hours into my diagnosis, and I just slowly took the pizza and was like, I'm not hungry anymore.
What a great start to the diagnosis.
What a great start. Yeah. And I, now looking back, 10 years ago, I like wish the conversation obviously went differently. Because just not eating pizza doesn't teach you how to eat pizza. Right. And there's so many different types of pizza that I'm truly passionate about, like showing type 1s like how to eat these foods, rather than just being like, no, right, don't eat it. Like, that's not a reasonable solution here.
Right. Yeah. And it's that whole like last supper mentality that I feel like is so dangerous. Like, yes, okay, of course, in the beginning of your diagnosis, before you're on insulin, it's important to maintain our blood sugars as much as possible. I was pretty much told, hey, like, you can either go to the hospital and like start insulin tonight, or we can get you set up with an endocrinologist tomorrow, but keep in mind, like, eat very low carb tonight. And like me being 18, 19 diagnosed, I was like, I don't even know what a carb is, so I'm just not gonna eat.
Yeah.
But it's dangerous, because then you're right, like, it doesn't teach us how to approach these foods once we're finally ready. to like, I'm going to my nieces and nephews' birthday parties. I'm not going to avoid the pizza because that is so much more than just a meal in that setting. It's a birthday party. It's a celebration. So why are foods like pizza so different than just the traditional, like we're always taught, you know, count your carbs, take your insulin. Why is that not the appropriate approach to things like pizza?
Yeah, so when we are diagnosed, like we are taught like pretty basic information. You're taught the information that's going to be just enough for you to get discharged safely at home. So usually carbs are the food that impacts blood sugars the most. So that's why there's always that emphasis on counting carbs. But other nutrients like protein and fat also impact blood sugars. And in regards to the food like pizza is high carb and high fat. So when you have that combination, that response on blood sugars is going to look very different than a meal that is just mostly carbs. So typically with a food that's high carb and high fat, it doesn't just impact it will impact blood sugars pretty moderately in the beginning, but then you normally see like insulin resistance, like depending on how much fat, like that 4-hour mark. I know sometimes when like I've eaten pizza in the past, I'm like, oh my God, I've nailed it.
Yep.
And then it's like 2 hours later, I'm like, oh my God, look at me. I ate pizza and I'm still in range. And then like hours 4 and 6 hit and I'm just like cruising up a mountain and I'm like, what happened? Where did this come from? And that's fat. And that's where like you have to, where you end up like injecting and injecting and injecting and injecting, and your blood sugar is just not coming down. And you're like, what is going on? I've taken double, triple the amount of insulin that's from your baseline. Your blood sugars still aren't coming down. That's fat.
Yeah.
And dosing for it is pretty tricky.
Yeah. Because there's that whole concept of, okay, we know it's coming, but when? It's almost like that, like, bomb dropping. And I know, like, I've had that same experience. Like, even last Thanksgiving, it wasn't pizza, but just a high fat component. I'm like, all right, didn't go to bed, had a nice filling day, and then all of a sudden I woke up and I'm like at 300, and that's like the common experience, which is so unfortunate. But when we think about these meals, like, so I don't know, like, about you, but I've had very different experience with pizza. It just kind of like depends on what I eat. Like, I've gone through the phase where I will only have Trader Joe's pizza, where it's like cauliflower, sweet potato crust. I have like, I guess my question here is like, how can we, what's different about these different approaches? Like, why cannot all pizza be treated the same?
Yeah, so normally when I asked my care team about dosing for pizza, it was just do an extended bolus. Just split your bolus for 2 hours and like you'll be good. And like, you know, sometimes that works. Like if you have like a frozen pizza, or you make like a bagel pizza or like a tortilla pizza at home, like that may work. But if you have deep dish meat lovers pizza, that extended bolus probably isn't gonna be enough. So the thing that ends up happening is there's so many different variables that go into pizza, and not all pizza is created equal. You have different crust sizes. So like if you're eating a tortilla pizza versus like thin crust or thicker crust pizza, the toppings that you have on a pizza, like margarita pizza, for example, they use fresh mozzarella. So like normally they use that pretty sparingly because it's expensive. Versus if you get like extra cheese, like sausage and pepperoni, that's going to increase the amount of fat on your pizza as well. And then the potential foods that you're eating alongside the pizza. So if you're eating like 3 slices of pizza with nothing on the side versus 2 slices and a salad, that blood sugar response is going to look very different. And different isn't bad. It's just we need to be aware of these potential variables so we have a strategy moving forward, and we're not also shocked by, oh my God, why is this happening?
Right.
We're anticipating it to happen.
Right. Which I think is like the very complicated part of it, because there's so many variables that we're already focusing on already as people living with diabetes. So we have already this foundation of life of before diabetes, and now we have all these other variables: our activity, our food, our hormones, our environment, our stress levels. There's just so much to even consider. So when you look at the different variables like that are involved in pizza, I know you just named a few, but what else kind of goes into it that you would consider when you're looking at kind of what's in front of you?
Yeah, so when it comes to like dosing for pizza or dosing for any high fat meal, a lot of times it comes with trial and error, because it is really challenging to dose for these foods. So when I have like the plate in front of me, the thing, I kind of go through like a mental checklist, like, okay, what's the size of the crust? What's the toppings that I have? Am I eating it with any other foods? And of course, there's going to be the other things like, how's my stress level? Did I just exercise? All of, the checklist keeps going and going. But from there, I normally have like a pretty good indication of what my strategy is going to be moving forward. And typically it is like some type of split dose. So I'm on injection, so I would do a split dose. So I would take some insulin up front. The amount that I take up front is again going to depend on those factors. So I may take more up front if it's like a tortilla pizza where I know like there's not much fat, it's mostly carbs, versus if I was having like deep dish meat lovers pizza. Like that fat is going to probably be more prominent later on, where those needs are going to be increased as well.
Can we dive into that a little bit more? Because even just like in our whole scenarios, I'm on the Omnipod, you're on MDI. So you kind of went into it a little bit right there, but how do those approaches change based on what technology you choose to use?
Yeah, so something that I've always thought was super interesting is if you even Google like how to dose for pizza, everything is about doing an extended bolus. And I find that really frustrating as someone who chooses to do multiple daily injections, because some of us don't have access to that technology and some of us just choose not to use it. And it's really frustrating because it's like, I can't do an extended bolus on injections. Like that's just not how it works. So with pumping, you can do an extended bolus. So that's when your pump will deliver like a portion of insulin up front, and then usually a standard percentage over whatever time frame that you choose. While with MDI, we want to try to mimic that. So with that, it could be split dosing. So that's taking that percentage up front and then waiting a specified amount of time and then taking that additional bolus. So you're like staggering your boluses rather than taking it all up front.
Right. So basically just kind of getting ahead of the spike as much as possible, because there's only so much that we can anticipate.
Yeah, and because fat slows down digestion, we also don't want to give 100 or full bolus up front either. So if you were to dose for pizza up front like 100%, you're likely going to go low, because that fat is going to slow down that digestion. And again, if there's even more fat, it's likely even more so. So usually like starting off, when in doubt, I usually just do 50-50. I don't know about you, but like that's usually where I feel comfortable when like I don't know. I know I don't need all of it, but I also don't know if I need more or less. Right. So I'm like, I'm going to start in the middle. So I would normally give 50% of however much I calculated out needing it to be. In addition to that, I normally will increase that bolus about 30%. To account for that increase of insulin for that potential insulin resistance from the fat. Right. And 30%, it sounds like a lot, but like in terms of insulin dosing, it ends up being just a couple units.
Right, pretty moderate.
It ends up being a pretty moderate amount. But again, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, like you can always be conservative and then always add more. That's usually the approach that I take. And usually the first time, like, you may observe some interesting things, but what I usually say during pizza is to pretend that it's like a science experiment and you're testing a hypothesis. So if you test that you've done like 50% up front, you end up going low, you know that 50% was too much. So maybe you only need 30% of your full bolus up front, and you need that 70% later on. Or maybe you, again, I always just think of 3 slices of deep dish meat lovers pizza, because that's like just, it's an extreme situation, but like it's helpful to have that strategy as well. You may need even more insulin over a longer period of time, where you may require additional boluses after that 6-hour mark.
Right.
Just because of the high level of resistance your body is experiencing.
That made sense. And I'm really glad that this is a part of the conversation now, that we've kind of stepped away from just that typical, okay, carbs and insulin, take it all up front mentality. Because to your point, so for anybody listening, like, we live in New Jersey, and New Jersey is notoriously known for our pizza. Like, there's just no other place, maybe New York, that does pizza quite like us. Jordan and I were in Vegas over in March visiting a friend, and she's like, I'm gonna order pizza, and Jordan just had that look on his face like, please don't let her order pizza, because it's just so different. But you know, our pizza is very different, and when I first approached it after my diagnosis, I had that experience of taking it all up front, you know, taking my 30-50 carbs, whatever it was, and then just going low, like within, you know, 40 minutes. And I'm like, what is happening? I just ate 3 slices of pizza and I'm going low. And I'm really glad that I didn't let that stop me, because to your point, it's trial and error. And the more that we know, the more information that we can use for our next, you know, attempts at this. So let's just say somebody may not have tried pizza yet after their diagnosis, or maybe they were like me for a few years and they're like, I'm just gonna wing it and hope for the best.
Yep.
We've all
Everyone's been there, done that.
What would be kind of like your top 3 best tips for approaching that scenario?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of, like, if it's your first time trying pizza, I think it's totally okay to start out with baby steps. So you know, instead of going for that 3 slices of deep dish meat lovers pizza, we can start off smaller. So maybe it's making something at home, like that tortilla pizza, where you have the sauce, you can control the amount of cheese, you can look on the back of the tortilla container to see how many carbs are in your tortilla. So you have that comfort of being at home, versus you go to a pizzeria and, like, you know, you have a slice that's like this big versus a slice that's like this big, but you know, you Google how many carbs are in a slice of pizza, and all of them say 30, and it's like, okay, that's not helpful.
Yep.
So sometimes starting at home can be really helpful in getting started, so you can start getting some of that data at the comfort of your own home. Once you start going out into, like, the real world, like going to a pizzeria or going to a birthday party, there's so much chaos, like, happening at that moment, that it can get really overwhelming and really, really stressful. That's often where we're just like, I'm just not gonna do this because it's scary and too much. So instead, we want to try to build up that confidence before those situations happen. That way we're like, okay, at home, when I've done this tortilla pizza, this is typically what I need. And then, you know, if you go out to a birthday party, you can kind of compare it to what you've done at the comfort of your own home, versus just being like, I'm just going to try it. It's almost like setting yourself up for failure in a way, because you know that pizza is notorious. We know that something wacky is going to happen to our blood sugar. And then when it does, we're just like, well, this is the exact reason why I don't eat it. And that can just be really discouraging. So I find trying it at home can be really helpful. Additionally, trying to eat that pizza with something with fiber can also be really beneficial. So yes, there's going to be times where, like, you just want to throw down 3 slices of pizza. Like, we've all been there. We all want to do it. Like, sometimes that's just what you need.
Friday night vibe.
But in some cases, a lot of people don't get enough fiber. And that's just very well known. So fiber can be really beneficial for blood sugars. So eating fiber, like, usually my go-tos with pizza is getting, like, a house salad, or they usually have, like, garlic broccoli, which is really good, or some type of, like, side of vegetables. And it's something that I can easily commit to, where I kind of take this as an approach of, like, having my cake and eating it too, where it's like, I can do something that is, like, beneficial for my blood sugars, and I'm still able to eat that pizza, rather than like there were years where like I just ordered a grilled chicken salad while like all of my friends ate pizza. So it's like I can still do something that's like health promoting, something that will help not only my blood sugars but my overall health, and I'm still able to eat the pizza.
Right.
So the reason why this strategy can be helpful is because fiber can also be really filling at the same time. So if you're filling up on something like a salad or vegetables or whatnot, you're likely not going to be eating 6 slices of pizza because you'll likely feel fuller sooner. So because of that, the volume of pizza that we're expecting is going to be less. So when you're eating less pizza, it's going to be less of an impact on blood sugar. So it'll be less of that fat rise, less of that resistance over that period of time. And again, it's like being able to have your cake and eating it too, which is always nice. Because I like to always have like the best of both worlds, and that's something that strategy can give for a lot of people.
I like that because it's also something that you can kind of take into other areas. So we know that like pizza is not the only high carb, high fat meal. And it's important that I think that you're teaching these strategies because we can take them into other scenarios. Like I've taken what you've taught me about pizza and have applied it to even going out to sushi. You know, I think I texted you the other day. I was like, I had edamame before having my sushi and my blood sugars are solid. I think it was at like 130. And it's just so important to have those tools because we might not always be able to control the situation, or we might just want to enjoy the environment around us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dosing for fat is really tricky, but you know, just like to what you said, that can be implemented in a number of strategies, whether it's like burgers and fries or Chinese food, macaroni and cheese. Like there's so many different scenarios where these same things, these same points can then be applied.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. And you're doing a really great job, I think, at teaching the community that. So you actually have an entire course or masterclass on pizza.
Yes. So I have a how to master the pizza bolus class. It's 45 minutes of me straight up talking about pizza.
So if you haven't had enough here.
Yeah, if you haven't had enough here, you can listen to me talk more about pizza for 45 minutes. So please come hungry. But with that, I'll go over more of the factors that are influencing your bolus. So that's like the toppings, the crust, why those things are influencing your blood sugar the way that they do. And then I also walk you through 3 different scenarios of dosing for pizza. So like I compare a tortilla pizza compared to like 2 slices of margarita to, of course, the 3 slices of deep dish meat lovers pizza.
Which one's your favorite? Because I can already tell.
Because, you know, we know not all pizza is created equal. And we also know that just minimizing it to just do an extended bolus isn't enough. So I give strategies for potentially what that blood sugar impact will look like, the reasoning behind it, and then also considerations for whether you're on MDI or whether you're on an insulin pump as well. So you kind of have that starting point going in for those 3 very diverse situations. That way you can truly learn how to not just master like a pizza bolus, like the pizza bolus, like no matter which scenario you're walking into.
Right. I'm so glad that you're doing things like this because, again, in a world that, you know, living with diabetes, we're kind of like taught that we don't have many options. And I think things like this are giving us options, not only to apply to pizza, but like we mentioned, to those other scenarios as well. So I'm just really excited about this. You did this masterclass inside of Keep 100. And when I tell you, all of the members that texted us after were like, we had pizza and it actually went very, very well. So it's definitely much needed. I'm going to put that link in the show notes for everybody so you can find that course. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about all the things pizza.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited for you guys to take a listen.